We are going to go now to Lebanon and try to cover this fast-moving story in Lebanon that Israel just appears like they're going for it, and they believe that they're in an existential battle, and they've spoken it into existence, because this war is not going to go well for Israel if this trajectory takes place here. So I've shown you this map a couple times over the last few weeks to see where the strikes are. We're mainly talking about in the south, although those strikes have been expanding, and that's part of the nature of the growing war, is to expand the distance that each group is targeting. 80%, as I've pointed out on a number of shows, 80% of the attacks since October 8th are by the Israeli military. Israeli civilian casualties are less than 10 in this entire time, and it's difficult to pinpoint exactly what a civilian is, because they were hit in villages that had been evacuated, and we saw that report that I showed you where the mayors and some other people in the villages are doing security work. They're watching the border. They're in an underground bunker with a in a control room with video all over, and they're the line to the IDF. They get on the phone and say, "There's a drone coming." Whatever. So whether they're called civilians or counted as soldiers, Hezbollah has not been targeting civilians. They target military bases. And this week at the Ramat David Air Base, Yoav Gallant, who is the defense minister, he said that the center of gravity is shifting to the north by diverting resources and forces there. We are at the onset of a new phase in the war. And sure enough, Tuesday was the pager attack. Wednesday was the walkie-talkie attack. Thursday, Nasrallah gave a speech, and more rockets were fired by Hezbollah than at any point in the war, and more airstrikes by Israel than at any time in the war. On Friday, there was the assassination of the Radwan commanders who were in a meeting in the Dahia. I'll get into those details after. I just want to give the timeline so people remember how quickly this all came about. And then Sunday was the big Saturday night, and Sunday was the major escalation that showed that Israel was going to war full on in this case. And then Monday they killed 500 people, 35 children. That number is now doubled. And 2,000 wounded. The Israeli Air Force said they struck 1,600 Hezbollah targets using 2,100 munitions, and that's just the Air Force. The drones added hundreds more strikes, and Israel said they used 250 fighter jets, which is double the number that they have been using previously. We can go to the next map and look at just the strikes over the last. This is the expanding of the strikes by Israel over these last few days. And I just want to point out some things that Nasrallah said about the walkie-talkie and pager events. He said in his speech, he said this was meant to kill 5,000 people instantly. There was 5,000 pagers in the pager shipment. Some of them weren't on. The ones that weren't on didn't blow up. He said this is a significant and powerful blow. There is no doubt that we were subjected to a major blow, both in terms of security and personnel, unprecedented in the history of the resistance in Lebanon, unprecedented in Lebanon and the conflict with the Zionist enemy, he said, and maybe on a global scale, because we've never seen anything even close to that kind of operation. To think about the criminality of that Israeli operation, to secretly intercept a supply chain, put them on an airplane with civilians who have no idea what these are, all throughout the shipment of these pagers. They have to come in trucks in the same way any other device would get shipped over the world. So some plane was flying unbeknownst, holding 5,000 exploding pagers and however many exploding walkie-talkies that would have downed the airplane, killed all the crew. This is a brutal crime that I think there'll be more time to digest and dig into the layers of the sick disposition that would let you think that that was a good operation. But in any case, he said that Nasrallah said the Lebanon front is a key bargaining chip for the resistance in Gaza. It's their way to push a ceasefire, to up the stakes, to climb the escalation ladder and get a ceasefire in Gaza. And he said the enemy's attempt to separate the Lebanese front from the Gaza front in threatening war will not happen. He said, he said to Netanyahu, you will not be able to bring the northern settlers back to the north. Do whatever you want. If you want to bring the settlers back, the only way is to stop the aggression on Gaza. No military escalation, no killing, no assassinations, and not even a full-scale war can return your settlers to the borders at all. And then when he threatened about a ground invasion, he said, we are searching for your Zionist soldiers and tanks. We look for them with lanterns and flashlights, he said, joking, right? Because they're not there. They moved 10 kilometers back from the border months and months ago so that they would be out of range of anti-tank fire. So the Israelis aren't even on the border. So he made a joke about that. He says, what you are about to do will further displace those fleeing from the north and will push away any chance of their return. What the enemy considers a threat, we consider a historic opportunity and we welcome it. That's how he views the ground war. A historic opportunity and we welcome it. So that is, well, the last thing he said is the enemy's foolish, narcissistic, reckless leadership will lead it to an abyss, which is, I think, a standard comment that probably most people that listen to the show agree to. It's just Israel is just on a self-destructive, brutal crime binge that we're watching right now. These last few days have been hard on everybody, the Lebanese primarily, but also the war in Gaza carries on at the same pace. So let's look at number 20, because this is Hezbollah admitted who died in the pager operations, and they admitted it right away, which was an interesting development for me, to release the full names and home villages of everyone killed almost immediately, surprisingly immediately. We don't know the names of these commanders. Their operational security is so tight that we don't know the names of their commanders. In fact, when 𝐓𝐻𝐿 𝐄𝐿, their number one commander, was killed, there was stories after that about how fighters in Hezbollah knew him from coming to meetings, but they didn't know his name, or they knew him as a different name. So they had anonymity even within, in many cases, their own organizations. And so to be able to hit these commanders, those two that you're seeing right there are the two main commanders of the Radwan force. I'll talk about those in a minute, but these assassinations that started with Fouad Shukr in Lebanon and then carried on with the Radwan forces commander don't have any analogy in history for the Israelis. They've never been able to get at these Hezbollah leaders inside Lebanon. Qasem Soleimani was assassinated in Iraq. 𝐓𝐻𝐿 𝐄𝐿 was assassinated in Damascus. Mustafa Badreddin was also assassinated in Syria. So these attacks in Lebanon are a big blow, and they're noteworthy for the fact that the pagers suggested a breach, and then these assassinations that follow up have underscored that breach. On Friday, the assassination of the meeting of Radwan commanders, Radwan forces named after 𝐓𝐻𝐿 𝐄𝐿, Haj Radwan. They were having a meeting. There was at least 8 senior commanders of the Radwan forces, which are special forces, Hezbollah's special forces. They're their attack forces. They're their cross-border raiding force that would go take the Galilee, which is what Israel pointed out when they assassinated them. They said that they were going to carry out a October 7th attack in the Galilee, which is not true in that framing. But the idea that Hezbollah is going to come down the mountain and take the Galilee has been something that Israel's been paranoid about really since the years after the 2006 war. So they were able to kill senior leaders in that operation, top generals, and you add that to Fouad Shukr, and it looks like you have a significant breach within the organization. So let's look at 21, because those two main guys that you see there, 𝐓𝐻𝐿 𝐄𝐿, he is the number one. Here's who you're looking at here. This is the first footage we've ever seen of them. We did this with Fouad Shukr too, because when they die, we learn who they are. We don't know who they are before. And so 𝐓𝐻𝐿 𝐄𝐿, Haj Abdul Qadir, He was the #1 commander of the Radwan forces. He was the founding commander of that unit, Special Forces unit. And he has been part of the original founders of, you can see him there eating with their troops. They always talk about that their commanders fight from the front, and they eat what their troops eat. And these videos are interesting because we've never seen him interacting with his troops. We've never seen him talk like this. We've never seen these rooms. So operational security only applies until their deaths. And then this video was released by Hezbollah this week. So he was a founder of Islamic Jihad. That was the pre-Hezbollah formation in the 1980s. And those were the guys that carried out consistent operations against the Americans. In the early 1990s, he became the commander of central training, so the overall training of Hezbollah cadre, and became chief of staff of the resistance, of the Islamic resistance in the 1990s. In 1997, he became the commander of operations in South Lebanon, which culminated in the 2000 liberation. And you saw him there in Syria. He fought in Syria, house to house in Syria, fighting that battle in Syria. In 2008, he took over as leader of the Radwan force, founding leader of the Radwan force. And he was also the commander in South Lebanon during the July 2006 war. So you're talking about top commander. And after Fuad Shukr's assassination, he became the top commander of Hezbollah, their overall leader. And here we're looking at Ahmed Wabi, Haj Abu Hassan Samir. He is the #2 in the Radwan force. So when 𝐓𝐴𝐻𝐿 𝐄𝐿 took over for Fuad Shukr, Ahmed Wabi became the head of the Radwan forces. So a significant loss. July 30th was when Fuad Shukr was lost. Ahmed Wabi was the field commander in the Ansariya operation in 1997. This was a devastating operation that thwarted an Israeli Special Forces, Flotilla 13 Special Forces, naval commandos under the command of Yoav Gallant. Invaded Lebanon in the secret, in the dark of night, attempting to carry out an assassination and counterintelligence operation by Hezbollah, met the fighters and wiped out the force, 12 special forces. It's called the boat disaster in Israeli narrative. But these guys, so key operations that he was responsible for, Ahmed Wabi. But both of them are from the founding generation of Islamic Jihad. They carried out the 1983 U.S. embassy bombing, which wiped out the CIA station in the Middle East and set back the CIA 20 years and set back intelligence in the Middle East more than 20 years. Remember the Iraq War, when the intelligence was so terrible by the CIA in the Iraq War and what they thought would happen and whether there would be an insurgency, and all of those mistakes that were made can be owed to the removal of a generation of CIA officers that were killed in the Beirut station in the embassy. They were involved in the 1983 Marine Corps barracks bombing, which killed 241 American Marines that were occupying Beirut at the time during the war with Israel after 1982. And they captured the CIA. They bombed the embassy twice. They bombed it a second time, the U.S. embassy, and they quite famously captured the CIA station chief. William Buckley was captured, so they caught the top intelligence official in that operation. So these Islamic Jihad guys have been wanted all over the American and Western world. There was a $7 million bounty on 𝐓𝐴𝐻𝐿 𝐄𝐿 for his role, and they didn't know that Ahmed Wabi was part of that operation because they had no idea who he was, which is part of the story. So it's important to note that these are the founding members, the founding generation of Hezbollah. They have prepared Hezbollah for this battle. Their assassinations they're temporarily disruptive, but they do not derail the operations of Hezbollah, because they have built a military organization that is able to replace its commanders and put people in positions to take over for any lost positions, whether they're lost on the battlefield, lost by assassination. they can be replaced. And that is the story, that this is confronting this face to face. This was a devastating week for Hezbollah. There's no question about it. That pager operation, the assassination of the Radwan commanders, Nasrallah admitted it. It's a blow. There's no point in hiding that. But the reality is, the war that carried on for the 3 days after that was proof that these fighters are able to replace their leadership. And as was the case with Abbas Moussawi's assassination in 1990, whatever it was, 92 or 93, he was more moderate than Nasrallah, or not as skilled as Nasrallah, all due respect to him. But Nasrallah came in after that assassination and changed the party in a way that Israel couldn't predict. And that's something that these assassinations always open the door to. So this footage is the first the world has ever seen of these fighters. And Hezbollah puts those videos out. And so I wanted to show you guys those because they mark a significant moment. And Nasrallah always jokes in his speech that there's so much that he can't say about his fighters. And when he does that, he's talking about these people. He's talking about these commanders who have been part of the history of the Middle East for 40 plus years. They've been hunted for years, but nobody knows who they are. In some cases, even in the organization, they don't know who they are. And so that operational security is part of the reason why this week's operations were such a blow to Hezbollah, and such a blow that would be acknowledged by Nasrallah as such. Because these are the founding generation. But they have, like I said, they led the training bureau within Hezbollah. They are the ones who trained the generation of fighters. There's Qasem Soleimani with them, with Ahmed Wabi, and showing you the connection. So there's one more guy there that was in that picture that has not been killed yet. So anytime you see the blur, that's good. Tomorrow, let's do 22, because the response to this was to upgrade the rocket arsenal that was fired at Israel. So this is the debut of a renamed Fadi rocket. This is it's tier 2. The Katyushas are tier 1. This is a tier 2 rocket, 83 kilograms of warhead. So a much heavier warhead. It's a 220 caliber rocket, so larger than the Grad rockets, double the Grad rocket size, and their range is 70 kilometers, so double the range of the Katyusha rockets that are being fired. And they're named after Fadi Tawil. Fadi Tawil was a founding commander, and his brother Wissam Tawil. He was assassinated earlier in the war, and we reported on that. He's a Radwan commander as well. So these are named after Fadi Tawil. And there's two. There's a Fadi 1 and a Fadi 2. The Fadi 2 is 170 kilograms of explosives, 302 millimeter rocket size, and 100 kilometer range. You could see they're truck launched. And the Hezbollah press pointed out, Hezbollah military media pointed out in their field report that the attacks yesterday were fired. Some of them were fired from the Imad 4 underground facility that we showed on the show a few weeks ago, that crazy underground bunker where they drove all those trucks with missiles on the back. That's what we're looking at being used. And Hezbollah fired 300 rockets on Monday, 300 rockets on Tuesday. So they doubled the number of rockets that had been fired as their peak. That's double the highest number of the 2006 war, and double the number that had been fired at any point since October 8th. And the targets were Megiddo airfield west of Afula, the northern command, the base of the headquarters of the Northern Command, who's responsible for the Lebanon border. They took 100 rockets. The Athlete Naval Base, where the Flotilla 13 Special Forces, they're the same ones that I said that were captured and killed in that 1997 Ansariya raid. So they were targeted. Their facilities were targeted. So they're picking military targets, symbolic, significant military targets, representative, not symbolic, representative targets. And so that is a qualitative upgrade in the way Hezbollah is fighting. If we look at 23, we can see the way these rockets were deployed. So now that you've seen those weapons, you can see here they're showing the Rafael base, Rafael Defense Industries, and they're showing Ramat David Air Base. So this is the Rafael facility and the airfield. And then there's a third, which is there's two bases. The Rafael base has two bases, and both of those sites, if you'll remember, both of those sites were subjected to drone footage. The Hezbollah drone footage that I took you through a couple months ago, that was released to show that they have intelligence over all of these sites that are being hit. So Yoav Gallant this week goes up to this Ramat David air base and says, this is where we're going to start the war. And immediately Hezbollah hits that base. So they're communicating with missiles, communicating with rockets. These are rockets. These are unguided rockets. These are not precision guided missiles. Those are still in the quiver to be used later, although it appears one may have been used earlier today to fire on the Mossad headquarters outside of Tel Aviv. But we're seeing these rockets be used, and you can tell a little bit by the launch of them that they're qualitative upgrades from the smaller Katyusha rockets. There's 80,000 Katyushas at least in Hezbollah's control. There's 80,000 of these Fadi rockets. They just introduced a Fadi 3 too yesterday. So yeah, they're hitting the Ramat David Air Base, which is it has all the most important. It's the largest air base in the north that has all the most important aerial wing formations that fight from the north. And the David facility of the Rafael Defense Industries, they're the ones who make the Iron Dome and David Sling. And the Rafael headquarters is in Haifa. That's what we saw on the coast there in the map. And so we've seen drone footage detailing all of this. And the David facility is the headquarters of Land and Naval Division. It's their Technologies and Ordnance Division. And the Lisham facility of Rafael in the Galilee, which we've also shown and the drone flew over, is for air superiority systems, air and C4ISR systems. That's surveillance, command and control and surveillance systems. But mostly what they're talking about is Iron Dome and David Sling that are made in those sites. So we see here, and then Hezbollah attached this footage, which was because the military censor in Israel doesn't allow any reporting on any of this. We have to rely on these occasional settler camera footage to show that anything happened at all. But those bases were targeted, and they're unguided rockets, but you can aim them. They're just unguided when they're in the air. So the rocket strikes hit those bases, and I guess we'll have to wait for satellite footage over those to see what kind of damage there was on those air bases, because those air bases took more than 100 rockets in doing that operation. So. That's the Haifa, the base, and you can see it's got the testing ground. You can see there too the testing ground around it. We saw the facilities; they have warehouses, and all the weapons testing facilities. They had the jet tester, the wind, what's it called, like the wind channel for testing they're testing all of these products. So Hezbollah knows where the weapons that are being used to counter their war. Ali will talk more about this later. But they know where the weapons and the systems and the people, the personnel, are based who are carrying out this war. And that's who they target. They're not raining missiles down on Haifa and Tel Aviv, which they could do in numbers of thousands. They could do that. But Hezbollah is not doing that. They don't want an open war. They don't want to massacre civilians. They want to defend Lebanon. They want to defend Gaza. And they added defending Lebanon to defending Gaza just yesterday. They said that our war is expanding to the objectives of this war, expanding to protecting Lebanon and its people. as well as protecting Gaza and being a second front in the war in Gaza. So important qualitative upgrades in the way that this battle is being fought, and the number of rockets more than doubling, which is an interesting development for sure. And if maybe tomorrow we do number 30, because just wanted to show you one last one here, is that we, over the course of the last 3 or 4 days, we saw the introduction of the Iraqi resistance joining the battle. So these are long-range cruise missiles being launched from Iraq. These are Iranian Sumar family missiles, the long-range, heavier payload cruise missiles that are launched, rocket launched. And Israel had to say that they intercepted these. They intercepted, at least one of these was intercepted, and they used a fighter jet to do it. So again, these cheaper missiles being used and having to be intercepted by billion-dollar jets flying at, $50,000 an hour or whatever, probably more when you consider the repair time. And that's their only defense against these. And so the Iraqi resistance, interesting to note, because if they were to join the war from the east in a concerted way by carrying out these drone and cruise missile attacks, you can see there they're noting the date of the attacks. These are fresh operations, and the Israelis have had to comment multiple times on the fact that they were getting fired. They say that they're targeting military bases in the Jordan Valley, military positions in the Jordan Valley, and that has been their primary target over these last 4 or 5 days. So you can see a number of drone launches coming from Iraq. And, the Americans are in the region. Nora said 40,000 troops. Also, the 101st Airborne is apparently landed in Cyprus to be deployed to Central Command, which is the Middle East's name. And the Americans are trying to keep the regional war element out of it. Because a regional war would mean Islamic fighters that are organized, trained, and battle-tested fighting, and Syrian fighters battle-tested joining that front. We have Ansar Allah. We saw last week their ballistic missile capabilities and their drone capabilities. You could have a 4-front war against Israel on top of the Gaza and the West Bank fronts. And at some point, a war of attrition defined this way is not going to be a war that Israel can win. And we're starting to see, even just in these first days, that Israel is qualifying, is trying to say this might be a short operation. We want this to be a short operation. But my instinct tells me that under these circumstances, ceteris paribus, all things being equal, airstrikes versus Hezbollah's rocket arsenal, especially with the north emptied of civilians and the south emptied of civilians, this war can go on for a long time. There's a lot of resources to carry out that war. If the targeting is not of civilian targets in Israel, but of military bases that are used with the Iron Dome interceptions, which Ali is going to talk about in a minute here, the fight of rockets on emptied settlements and airstrikes on Hezbollah positions or houses that are emptied in the south could go on for a long time. They both have a lot of resources to carry out that war. And if this war by Netanyahu is a way of getting out of the war in Gaza, or putting that to the back burner, you'd be very surprised to see Hezbollah leave the Gaza, to break off from the Gaza front. Hezbollah has said all along, the war in Gaza ends, our rockets will stop. And people can go back to their homes, presumably when those rockets stop. And the same, Ansar Allah has said the same thing in Yemen. If you stop blockading the Gaza Strip, they'll stop blockading the Red Sea. These have been known for the entire war. So it looks like we have been covering Hezbollah for the last number of months, but it looks to be a permanent fixture on the live stream to be covering this war as well. So that's the resistance report from Lebanon this week.